Welcome back, and in this video we're going to continue to talk about English colonization of North America and how that's part of the spread of the Reformation. First English colonies in Newfoundland are unsuccessful, and the second effort to found an English colony 2 years later, Roanoke colony, is also unsuccessful. The next attempt to found an English colony is carried out by a man named James White, who takes a group of 100 men and 17 women and settles them in the Chesapeake Bay. When they struggle for food, he returns home and he says, hang in there, we're making it work, we just need a little help. I'm going to go back and get some food supplies for England, and then I'll return. He returns in the beginning of 1588, and basically he's told, you can't take any ships back to North America because we need every ship to defend England against the Spanish Armada. After the Spanish Armada has been successful, he returns to North America, but the colony has just disappeared. And so no one really knows what happened to them, but that's the reason why, part of the reason why they disappear. It's all linked to the Spanish Armada, all linked to the Reformation. The first successful English colony is the colony of Jamestown that you can see on the map here, that was founded in what becomes the state of Virginia in 1607. This is now the reign of James I, James Stewart. This is part of the early optimism that surrounded the first part of James's reign. The later religious tensions of James's reign will also stimulate English exploration. But this first successful English colony is founded by 144 settlers who establish themselves as farmers. Now, the way these colonies were founded, they were founded by companies. They were founded as business enterprises. So this was the Virginia Company that was named in honor of Elizabeth I. So the idea is that the colony will provide the transportation to bring the colonists to the New World. The colonists will receive land, the opportunity to farm, and then part of their product will be given back to the company to return to England and sell. And initially, the settlers find farming in this part of Virginia and the winters in Virginia they find very difficult. They're protected, however, by the Powhatan tribe and by the figure of Pocahontas, who is the subject of a Disney movie, but is also a real historical character who befriended the English settlers and protected them from outside attacks. In 1614, one of the settlers named John Rolfe marries Pocahontas and begins the practice of cultivating the crop of tobacco. The crop of tobacco is going to be the most successful crop of the Virginia colony. It's going to enable this colony to survive and be successful. And so from this point onwards, with the cultivation of tobacco, the Jamestown colony begins to turn in a profit. You have more people coming, more money is being made, the colony is expanding. Now the Powhatans start to feel threatened, and in 1620 they attack the Jamestown colony, and a war breaks out that lasts for 2 years. In the end, the English settlers are successful and defeat the Powhatans, but the conflict bankrupts the Virginia Company. So the company that had sponsored this colony, they're not making any money while the settlers are fighting a war, and so the company goes bankrupt, and so this settlement is renamed as the Royal Colony of Virginia in 1622, and it comes under the direct rule of the King of England. At this time, that's James I, still James I. What's interesting and significant to note is that even at this early stage, the settlers in Virginia had established a general assembly where all the men who owned property in this community exercised a vote. And so this was considered very progressive for the time. It's a sign of the sense of independence and the desire to govern themselves that we see expressed by these early settlers in North America right from the very beginning. So it's important to keep that in mind. Now, before James dies, he establishes Virginia as part of the Anglican Church, subject to the same state religion of Anglicanism that England is subject to. However, other colonies that develop in the New World are results or are stimulated by religious tensions in England at this time. So there are two groups that are dissatisfied with James's rule. Those are the Catholics and the Protestants. Catholics had high expectations for James. They figured that no one could be worse than Elizabeth I. They remembered that James's mother was a Catholic. They hoped this would mean that he would treat the Catholics more leniently than Elizabeth did. However, you think back to last week, you'll remember that James certainly didn't want religious pluralism in his kingdom. He wanted both church and state to be under his control, and so a couple of years into his reign, it's become obvious he's not going to relax the restrictions on Catholics. And this leads a group of Catholics led by a man named Robert Catesby to plan to blow up the Houses of Parliament with James inside when he came to open the Houses of Parliament as part of the new year. They think that they have to do this. They think this is a way of getting rid of James and getting rid of the radical Puritan Protestants in the House of Parliament. However, the plot is uncovered and foiled. The man who was supposed, this is Robert Catesby over here, this is a Guy Fawkes Mask. This was supposed to be, Guy Fawkes was the man who was supposed to carry out the bombing. He's captured and tortured and then executed. And this is the worst possible result for the Catholics because it's kind of proved the argument that has been made against them this whole time, that the Catholics are dangerous enemies of the state, dangerous terrorists. And so this leads to a renewed persecution of Catholics. The situation for Catholics in England actually becomes worse rather than better. Now, baptism of your child, your marriage, they have to be registered with a Protestant minister, or you're basically sort of an undocumented citizen in this society. And so Catholics increasingly have to choose between this status and between having their children baptized by a minister who's not of their faith, or being married in a religion that they don't consider their own. As you'll know from last week, however, Catholics in high society were still tolerated by the Protestants. One of these was a man named George Calvert. George Calvert was the Lord of Baltimore, and he converted to Catholicism in 1632. At this point, Charles I is the ruler of England, and Calvert recognizes that he needs to resign his position in Charles's government now that he's become a Catholic. But he and Charles nevertheless remained close friends. And so Charles grants Calvert land in North America where he can found a colony where Catholics can live with less harassment than they're experiencing in England. And so this leads Calvert to establish the colony of Maryland in 1633. Now, there weren't enough Catholics to have a fully Catholic colony, and so the principle of religious practice in this colony of Maryland is religious toleration. So it's not as though this is a colony with the state religion of Catholicism. It's established more as a colony where Catholics, Protestants, Puritans, all of them can practice their religion openly. And of course, there is persecution from Anglicans in Virginia who don't like the Catholics arriving that the colony of Maryland has to face. The other group that was disappointed by James's close allegiance with the Anglicans was the Puritans. The Puritans remembered that James had been raised by Calvinists in Scotland, and so they hoped that James would kind of move away from Anglicanism and move towards a more Calvinist religion, or promote Calvinism in the kingdom. But again, they're disappointed. James wants to have a hierarchy to make sure he has greater control over the church. And so beginning in 1592, so this goes even before James's reign, legal measures start to be enacted against Puritans as well as against Catholics. It's important to remember that the Anglican group in England at this time were in some ways more concerned about the Puritans than they were about the Catholics. The Catholics wanted to change change the religion or change the religion back to the religion that it had been before in the society, but they knew that the Puritans wanted to totally transform the social structure of England. And so beginning in 1592, Puritans were imprisoned and persecuted, and eventually, and just as we've seen on the continent with the more radical Protestant groups, they determined to set up their own separate society where they can practice Christianity as they see fit. And so a group of Puritans named the Plymouth Brethren flee to Holland in 1607, and they set up their own independent community there. But they worry that they're still in a very fragile position. Remember that Holland had been a part of the Spanish Empire. It had fought a brutal civil war in order to gain its independence from Spain. The civil war had been fought on the grounds of religion. Plymouth Brethren remain concerned that the Spanish will make another attempt to reincorporate Holland into their empire, which in the end they do. And so in 1607, in 1620, they leave Holland and travel to the region of North America that will become known as New England on a ship called the Mayflower. And so there's a group of about 100. They make a 65-day passage, which was considered a good passage at the time. That meant that you had good wind and pretty calm seas. The ship was, this is a replica of the Mayflower, so you can see that even a good passage like this would have been in cramped conditions, would have been quite difficult. And they arrive in New England. Now, when they arrive in New England, they arrive again as one of these company arrangements, that there's a company that's sponsoring them making this voyage, and the idea is that they're going to fish off the coast of New England, and the company is going to come and it's going to collect some of the fish to transport back to England. In return, they get to live independently in North America. And so they discover a harbor off Cape Cod that they name New Plymouth, and they agree to what is known as the Mayflower Compact. And in the Mayflower Compact, they determined that they will govern themselves according to the majority view of the male settlers. So again, we find that this culture of independence is very present in this colony even from the beginning. And they were, the Puritans were not even interested in supporting the company once they got there. And so the company quickly cuts its losses with them, and they become fully independent even of the company that had sponsored them. Now, the first winter of this colony was brutal. It was brutal because they arrived in November, right around the time of Thanksgiving, and it's too late for them to plant any crops. But nevertheless, the colony manages to survive. Despite the fact that 60% of the settlers die, the 40 who survive determined to remain for another year. And over the next year, the situation improves. Native Americans teach them how to fertilize the soil and grow native plants. And this man named William Bradford successfully maintains peace with the Native Americans, maintains peace in the colony, and is able to increase the food supply. And we'll talk about what happens next with this colony in the next video.